when we hear this entire package of Buddhist teachings, this is unique to these Tibetans, you know, this Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama, on the basis of the text of Atisha, back in the 11th century, when he first came from India to Tibet and spent the last 15, 20 years of his life there. He wrote this little text, and he took it from this vast body of knowledge that he'd been, you know, he's one of the great Nalanda tradition, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama always tells us, his amazing monastic university in India flourished 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, and then, you know, kind of collapsed. And it's continued in Tibet. I mean, from the 7th, 8th century onwards, all these great masters were flooding into Tibet. This is where the Dharma grew, you know, in Tibet. And so Atisha came along 10th, 11th century, 1100, that must be 12th century. And whatever it is, around then, he was invited by the king. And so he wrote this little text, like that guides you on your way, and as always, kind of very poetic and little verses, and it looks quite simple. But what he did was he took all the essential points from all this vast body of knowledge studied in these great monastic university system, took the essence of it, each of these, and presented them in an experiential way in order to get the taste of it, not as intellectual knowledge, but obviously as with any body of knowledge that you're learning, in an orderly way. And guess what? Orderly according to the capacity of the student. It's pretty clear. We call it learning. You do a 5-year course, a 7-year course, a 1-month course. You start with the early stuff, you go to the middle stuff, and you go to the advanced stuff, and then you graduate. Same here. So what are we graduating as? A Buddha. Buddha. Bud. You know, the etymology of it is very tasty. Bud implies the eradication from our mind of all delusions, all ego, all neurosis, all misery, therefore all suffering. This is Buddha's point. And Da, the development to perfection of all the goodness in us. This is essentially, it's almost just a simple concept. This is what a Buddha is. No delusions and full of goodness. I mean, it sounds kind of cliched and simple and cute, but by understanding Buddhist psychology, we'll get the meaning of this. And this is implying the method. It implies we have to learn to distinguish between the rubbish, the facts and the fiction. You know, that's what we were talking about yesterday. The second scope, middle scope, high school. The day before we talked about karma, the first scope. So we're discussing it, but here in particular, just to get us to see the framework we're using here, or the point I'm making here in these talks, is to see how all of these teachings lead us progressively and logically, incrementally, to the realization of emptiness, to the last of the 6 perfections, which is the final stage of the Bodhisattva path. It leads us perfectly, like all body of knowledge. You know, if you want to start being like Einstein, you've got to start with 1 + 1 is 2. You don't leap into physics. You've got to have so much stuff you've got to learn already. And you mightn't realize it when you're a little girl at school that you're heading towards physics. This whole body of knowledge is leading you to physics, you know, let's say. But once you look back on it and you start to understand what you're doing, you start to see the relationship. All we're doing is here pointing out the relationship, the kind of the learning in the first scope. So the explicit, like I've been saying, the explicit teaching in the first scope is, given that we're all driven by delusions, Buddha's telling us this, and that's why we suffer. That's his essential point across the board. Then first we have to control the servants of the mind. The mind is the point. That's Buddha's expertise, I promise. But the servants, our body and speech, are out of control. Why? Because the delusions are out of control. So control the servants first. That's the essence of junior school, the first scope. All the other teachings in there, like perfect human rebirth and impermanence and the lower realms, all that leads you, primes your mind to want to get to the final point, the culmination of the lower scope, which is start to practice by putting your mouth, you start to actually practice by controlling your body, controlling your speech, and beginning to control your mind. And the first teaching Buddha gives us, he exhorts us to stop harming others. This is the explicit teaching. Why would he ask us to stop harming others? And always are reminding us, perpetually, continually reminding us the difference. You know, if you're a Christian, you're doing God's will. And I'm not complaining, but that is not what you're doing here. Buddha's not a boss. He's not the boss. He's not the creator. He's not a punisher. He's not a rewarder. There's no concept like that. For when it comes to these big deal things, these natural laws, this is natural law for the Buddha, that every living being who has this beginningless and endless mind that is not physical, there's not the handiwork of mummy daddy, it's not the handiwork of a creator, it's not a function of the brain. The grosser level functions in relation to the brain. Yes, you could argue, without trying to insult neuroscientists, that what goes on in the brain is like an indicator of what's happening in the mind, but only at the gross level. So the very first stage is the explicit teaching is behave nicely. So what's the consequence of this? Well, you become a calmer, more steady, more controlled person because you're controlling your body and speech. And then in the long term, you're stopping sowing negative seeds in your mind that would ripen otherwise as suffering, because the fundamental law of karma is that you're producing yourself. You make yourself. It's self-creation, as His Holiness says. This is a very profound view. It's a very astonishing view. It's a very shocking view. It is not the Christian view. There's some degree of that in there. You know, you reap what you sow. We have that concept, but there's still an assumption of an intrinsic me and a creator and this kind of business. Not like in Buddhism, not like that. And you're not the handiwork of your parents. Big shock. I mean, big shock. They give you your body, no argument. They do not give you your mind. This is the Buddha's incredibly clear point. It's so shocking to hear it. So we need to try and understand it logically, just even theoretically, you know. So what goes on in our mind produces our future. Even what goes on in our mind right now already determines whether we're happy or suffering right now, you know. But first we control the body and speech. So that's the obvious, the explicit teaching. That's the evident one at that level. Stop creating future suffering. And also in terms of the 3 levels of suffering, which we study in the Four Noble Truths, this is the first kind of suffering. We stop the first kind of suffering. The first kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering. The lower realms and all the bad stuff happening even in a human birth. Getting killed, lied to, stolen from, getting sick. It's called the suffering of suffering. It's the evident level of suffering. You don't want that. Even if you can't think of other things, you know you don't want that. Well, honey, Buddha says stop creating it. Your doctor says, do you want diabetes, Rowena? No, thank you. We'll stop creating it. It's very simple. We're creative ourselves. Whereas it's not what we tend to think as punitive. God says, don't do it. If you do it, you'll get punished. If you don't do it, you get rewarded. That's not the Buddha's view here. That's dualistic. There's no view like that. This takes time. So what I've been getting at is the implicit teaching from that. As we start to learn to abide by the laws of karma, we start to stop feeling like an innocent victim. We stop feeling like I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. Good luck, bad luck. It's not all I want is the nice things. I deserve nice things. Don't deserve bad things. These are the assumptions deep in our bones that we have to start to unpack as we start to practice. And then by abiding by the laws of karma, it stops the feeling of being a victim, because you did ask to get born. You created your damn self. Excuse me, you know. This is a shocking concept, which it should blow our minds. But instead of that, we just hear, oh, you mean I'm a bad person? I must have done bad things in the past. It so devastates us. It's very fascinating. Yeah, and millions of good things, dear. Millions of good things you've done. Look at your life. Every tiny good thing that you ever experience is the fruit of your hard work. We should be blissed out and crying with bliss and joy at our past virtue, but we only think of the bad things. This is so bizarre, but we're all like this. It's utterly fascinating. You start to grow up, less victim, less depression, less anger, less jealousy. It takes time, I promise, but you've got to think it through. You're reconfiguring the way you see yourself and the world. That is what brings more steadiness and more contentment. And so what I'm getting at is it begins to loosen the grip of this self-pity me, as Lama Yeshe kind of brutally calls ego. You become more confident. You become more accountable, more grown up. Less victim, less attachment, less anger. That's not what you're trying to do, but that's an inevitable result of abiding by the laws of karma. Because why? Because the law of karma is the law of cause and effect, and and karma is a perfect example of the first level of dependent arising, which we're going to talk about today, which everything that impermanent phenomena are the product of cause and effect. As opposed to what? Well, look at the way we instinctively think. I didn't ask to get born. I'm an innocent victim. Nothing to do with me. That's a concrete view of a me that has no relationship to the outside world. That's arguing. Karma argues with that. And that brings more clarity, more grown up, more contentment. That's the point I'm getting to. It loosens the grip of ego grasping. Then we went to high school. Having subdued to some degree our body and speech, we now begin to get to the root of the problem, which is the mind. So that's what we learn about the Buddhist model of the mind, all the mental consciousness, sensory consciousness, and the massive distinction between those two, which is already the revelation. And then understanding the mental consciousness, unpacking it and unraveling it, you know, the contents of our mental consciousness, thousands and thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions, you know. Buddha divides into 3 categories. The neurotic, deluded, ridiculous, I-based ones that are rooted in fear and misery, that are in themselves suffering and the cause of suffering and the cause of doing dumb things that harm others, which brings future suffering. The positive, valid, reasonable ones, and then the mechanics of the mind that make us function properly, like concentration, good memory, discrimination, many of these, without which we just be a maniac. These are like the mechanics. So we looked at a bit of that yesterday. So The point here, though, that's the explicit one. You're learning to give up these delusions because you become sick of the suffering that they cause. This is the main teaching at this level. You want to become revolted by suffering. As you know, and like Kimberly quoted it, or somebody quoted it, and Lama Zopa says, who was it yesterday? Maybe Kimberly. That Rinpoche, quoting Rinpoche, that we have got renunciation. Renunciation means you've given up suffering and its causes. Like you're so sick of the thought of diabetes, you really realize that you've been living in diabetes all your life, you never realize it. You're so sick of it, up to here with it. So you're going to give up diabetes and its causes. Eating the wrong food. You've got to be revolted by that suffering because the attachment is very strong and you won't want to give it up. But when you know it's suffering, so you've got that renunciation of suffering and its causes. Suffering, the first level, the gross suffering. But the second one, the suffering of change, the more nuanced, more subtle suffering, which we call happiness. We went into this to some degree. So this really needs thinking about. When we have got some level of renunciation, even of these two, forget the subtler suffering, which we're going to get to today, with emptiness. Rinpoche said, when you've got renunciation, just the thought of attachment, just the thought of another moment of attachment, just the thought of another moment of attachment is so repulsive. Two different things I remember. One time he said, it's like using used toilet paper. Or it's like being in a septic tank. Trying to be very graphic examples. Now, that should be very humbling to us, because right now, when we understand what Buddha means by attachment, we realize we are swimming in it. It's our default mode. And don't be depressed by this. It just shows us how primordial it is. So it should give us humility and patience to persevere with it. Don't feel guilty. I mean, this is Buddha's view of what attachment is just way more subtle and more primordial and more pervasive than we can even imagine. It's actually the cause of this entire universe. This body is the product of countless lifetimes of attachment. What do you think caused, it's like karma's like personal evolution. Except it's not evolution. It's going downwards. Attachment causes the five senses. What do you think? What are you going to think of penises and vaginas and mouths and ears and eyes and tactile from? That's from attachment, from eons of lifetimes of practicing attachment. We literally have created. That's like evolution, That's what evolution is. You think about it. You jump into a lizard's, the Buddhist view. You're a consciousness, let's say you were born at some point in some other realm, and then due to negative karma, you get born into a lizard's mummy's womb. And you act like a lizard. So you hop into a lizard house, you act like a lizard, you become like a lizard, and you start doing some housekeeping. And you change, this is what evolution is, isn't it? How they talk in the external world. So then you act a certain way, you have to adjust to your environment. So you start to sort of grow a longer little toe. Who caused that? Your mind, by being a lizard. And then the next lizard, and you give birth to another lizard, which gives birth to another lizard. That's the external house that you jump into. So karma is by doing the actions internally. You produce the cause, you create the cause to get a body with five senses. You create the cause to get a lizard body, a dog body, but we create the cause to have a human body even, which looks like an animal, basically. We have five senses. We created these. It's like from the result of evolution, longer toenails, so we've got ears and noses and penis and vaginas. And we created this. We're not the product of some creator up in the sky who makes us. There's no view like that. That's ridiculous of Buddha. It's not just the physical. It's not just your parents. Going back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa to the monkey. That's just the house. The body's just the house. The mind that comes into it is the one that's the result and the cause of what goes on, The minds do the work. We created this. So attachment is primordial. We are living in a realm of desire. We are living in a realm. This is all pervasive suffering. The first kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering, which is when the bad things happen. In other words, when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Because attachment is the default mode here. Then the second kind of suffering is when attachment does get what it wants, which is what we call happiness. The subtlest level of suffering, all pervasive suffering, conditioned suffering, it's sort of like because attachment's like being a junkie. Addiction, attachment, addiction, they're the same. We are addicts, we are attachers, we are junkies. So the first kind of suffering is, when the bad things happen. You're born. So the second kind of suffering is when the good things happen, because it's driven by attachment. The more you get, the more you want. The third one is that you're born, all pervasive suffering is you're born in a body, which is the body of a junkie, the five senses, created by attachment. And you're born in a world constructed of heroin, the five sense objects, the outside world. So to survive, you must ingest them. Look at us. I have to eat, I have to see things, I have to smell, I have to taste. We say that. Yeah, because you're stuck in this suffering, that's why. So the way to get rid of the first kind of suffering, do junior school, stop harming others. The way to stop the second kind of suffering, do high school, give up attachment. The way to get the third kind of suffering finished, get to the, go through the final stage, get bodhicitta, then get to the 6 perfections, and then realize emptiness and cut the root of all of it. So the whole Lam Rim is structured like this to remove the 3 kinds of suffering, the 3 levels of suffering, all very organic and very logical, So one step at a time. So yesterday we did that, and then we began getting into the compassion wing. The first stages of the compassion wing based on bodhicitta, based on equanimity, as we discussed. We want to try and make this paradigm shift in our mind, going through these different stages, incremental steps. We mentioned there's about 11. I didn't say them all, but there's a combination of 2 techniques for achieving this bodhicitta, this outrageous paradigm shift in the mind, where you really actually exchange self for others, not just temporarily, not just emotionally for a moment, but, truly, stably. You can still lose bodhicitta. It's very shocking. At certain levels of bodhicitta, you can still lose it until you've gone to certain stages. You can't lose emptiness, though. That's why we're still in samsara, because we haven't cut the root which we're getting to. So we go through these different stages. We haven't got enough time for everything. So we go from equanimity. We then start to want to have love, compassion, great compassion for all sentient beings. And then we went through the 8 verses, and we didn't do the last 2 of the 8. We went through the first 6. This is like a really perfect example of this radical approach of these great holy beings who are dying to stop their suffering. And the best way to stop the dying to get rid of delusions. And the quickest way to get rid of delusions is to confront, is to have your delusions pointed out. The quickest way to know you've got anger is have a person who you can't stand. There's always a story about Atisha. He had this really rude cook, really mean and rude, and people didn't understand why he didn't get rid of him. And he said, how else would I know if I had anger if I didn't have him? That's the one this is the brave level. This is the one of transforming problems into happiness. Like I said yesterday, if you're still the level of being a victim, you haven't even begun working on your mind, your solution to having an abusive husband is get the hell out of there as quick as you can. That shows how hopeless we are. We go back from, like a moth to a flame for more punches, because we have no sense of knowing that we can act. So that's your first step. But if you start to practice and you get to the bodhisattva level, you're happy to have an abusive husband. I'm not joking, because it's all grist for the mill for you. It's water off a duck's back, and it helps you practice. It's like when you go to the gym, you don't complain when it starts getting difficult. You're happy when you start testing your muscles, because that's how you improve yourself. We're talking about mental muscles here. It's a very advanced level. It's in this bodhisattva level we're describing. So then we've got bodhicitta. I just went through quickly the steps, didn't really say many. And now we go to the final stages of the path to enlightenment. And this is the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. So up until now, see, there's different, up until now, the level of practice, starting with junior school and high school, is the level of practice called the morality of restraint. It's obvious you're refraining from harming. You're refraining from delusions. You're training, you're removing the weeds from the ground. Even when you get to the bodhisattva path, the reason to continue working on your mind, which never stops, is now the first lot is because to stop you from suffering. The next lot is to help you break down the barriers delusions have constructed between self and other. But still, all the vows of a bodhisattva are the morality of restraint. Don't do this and don't do this. You're really honing yourself. You're transforming your body and speech you're transforming your mind. Now we get to the 6 perfections, with this incredible bodhicitta and all this, the other, work underneath in our belt. And now we're driven by this profound, outrageous view to never give up, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, perfecting yourself, doing the work that's necessary to become a Buddha. It takes many lifetimes. So the first 4 perfections are the practices of benefiting others in 4 different ways, or not quite like that. It's 4 different, it's called, the first 4 of these perfections are the practice of generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. The last 2, so they're the first 4. Those first 4, you're perfecting the compassion wing, your work in relation to others. You go from life to life, meeting sentient beings, practicing generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. And we'll describe these briefly. And then we perfect the wisdom wing in our constant meditation. We get the 5th one, which is concentration, shamatha, calm abiding, getting to this subtle level of mind, like laser-like focus. So with that laser-like focus, we can then get the 6th perfection, which is get insight into how things exist ultimately. This is leading us to where we're going now. We're getting to where we've been leading the whole time. I'm about to sneeze, I think. Just a minute. Excuse me. Can't see anything. Okay. Okay. You can hear me? Yes? Okay. Okay, so the first 4 perfections, just it's important to mention them. The next one is generosity. That sounds kind of simple, and why it seems fairly arbitrary group of 4 things, doesn't it? Generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. Why these? What's the logic of this? Well, first of all, they're taught in order of difficulty, and the bottom line. Remember, the bottom line, the essence of a bodhisattva is that you've done this, you've made this paradigm shift. Now others are more important than you, and we've got to try and imagine how that's possible based on all the previous work. Driven by unbelievable compassion, unbearable compassion, Rinpoche says. Unbelievable compassion, day and night. It's like every single person in the universe is your child. So it's just natural. It's your job, It's pretty profound, it's pretty outrageous. It's hard to imagine it's possible. So everything you do is driven by this bodhicitta. But you've got more work to do. You've got far more work to do, so you're going to be bopping along life after life after life, and you've got to be connecting with sentient beings, making eyeball-to-eyeball contact. And you want to lead them all to enlightenment, but many won't be ready. So you give them whatever they need. One person you meet might need a cup of tea, so you give them a cup of tea. But what you've done is created a karmic connection, and 47 lives later, when they're ready to be led to enlightenment, because you've made a karmic connection, you'll meet them again, they'll recognize you, and you can drag them to enlightenment. So there's a really important point about the bodhisattva path. These bodhisattvas, they've got this long-term goal, kind of like they're fanatics, if you like, sounds a weird thing to say. They're 100% devoted to benefiting sentient beings. They're never wavering from this. It's like I said, it's hard to imagine this. So the best you can do is read about the great yogis, read the teachings on what bodhicitta is, what you cultivate, what you're like, because it's all there. It's all part of the path, So generosity is taught in 3 different levels. And this is the first. As Tsongkhapa says in one of his wonderful experiential little Lamrim texts called Hymns of Experience, Songs of Experience, he says, generosity is the wish-fulfilling jewel with which you can fulfill the hopes of all sentient beings. It's the basis of the activity of the bodhisattvas in that it develops the selflessness and undaunted courage to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. So you're getting this courage. And the first of the 4, of these first 4, the least difficult, this one of, whenever you meet a sentient being, with bodhicitta, whenever you meet a sentient being, it's like your child. It's your job. It's your job to help them. As we talked before, the only ones we want to help now are our objects of our attachment. You see your child, you rush to help them, and you leave the other one drowning. I mean, get my point. Here, they're all like your children. It's the best way to say it, which is, again, hard to imagine, isn't it? So you're driven to do whatever's necessary. And because you've got a bit of wisdom, you're not some silly person who runs around trying to help everybody and they punch you in the nose. You've got wisdom too. You're going to develop more wisdom, but you've got some, based on what you've done so far, ridding the mind of all the rubbish, you've got a lot of wisdom. You can see how to benefit others, and that keeps growing. So the first level of generosity is to give material things. The second level is give spiritual advice. The third is called giving protection. Well, giving spiritual advice as a second is meant to be more difficult, but I'm sorry, I think it's the other way around for us. We don't like giving material things at all, but we love giving advice. Even if people don't ask, we'll tell them what to do, We love giving spiritual advice. It's very easy for us, cheap and easy. Giving materials and giving £1, not so comfortable. So I think it's a really good one to think about. But the point here is, it's like this, it's the beginning of this generosity one is that it's breaking down. What you're doing is you're breaking down the barriers between self and other. It's obvious. If every time you see a sentient being, an ant, a dog, a human, a beggar, you're immediately thinking spontaneously, what do they need, I mean, think about this. We don't walk down the street thinking this way. We might be moved by one person, but most of the time we're overwhelmed by I. We're thinking about getting, you're thinking about your children. That's good. You're worrying about getting the right food for your kids, making your hubby happy. That's all right. But you walk past the homeless people, we don't look at them, I mean, just simple examples to try and imagine what you're doing as a bodhisattva is every sentient being just to know what is it they need. Some person might need a hello. That's a piece of advice. Some person might need $1, whatever, and you've got the wisdom to know what to give. So what we're trying to do here is train our mind in this attitude. It doesn't come naturally. We've got to train it. It's like you don't just go naturally and play tennis overnight like Federer. You've got to train yourself. Well, here we're training our mind. You're training your mind. I always use the example of the prison project that I ran for many years, which now is, I don't run it now for 10, 12 years now. I still work with some people in prison, but it's a very powerful example for me of this whole approach, you know. There I was editing Mandela. I was based in California in the mid-90s, editing Mandela, and we got a letter from this young Mexican-American young prisoner. He was 20, 18 or something, told me he'd been in gangs since he's 11, in prison since he's 12, basically. And he finally got out like a few years ago. He was 42. Spent 2/3 of his life in prison. He hadn't killed anybody, just been in gangs, right? But he worked so hard on himself, incredible. Now he's living in LA, you know, unbelievable. So he wrote, first person who wrote, a letter came on my desk. I sat it there for a while and I finally answered. And then within a year, 40 people were writing. And every time another person would write, I mean, I was working for Mandela. There was no budget for prisoners. I had no money. I was a nun. I was getting a couple $100 a month and my food, you know. Another letter would come and you could see the sincerity in this letter. They got no money. They've got no computers. They have no money, no friends, no resources. They just want to do is write a letter. I heard about your books. I heard about Buddhism. I'd really like a book, please. What can you do? You can't just give it to somebody else. It's on my desk. This is the training. It was such a powerful example for me. So I had no choice. So normally we go, you look in your pocket, there's no money, isn't it? You look in the pocket, there's no money. Oh, I can't do it, we'll say. This is very deep in us. I haven't got the money, I can't do it. But we had to we had to switch it around. I saw the letters and I saw the sincerity and I could see there was no choice. I couldn't just give them a website like we can if another person calls. So you have to shift it around and say, I will do it. Then I'll find the money. So you're led by the thought, I want to do it. I will do it. And when we get to enthusiasm, this is especially powerful. So you shift the mind. So we had to do this. I couldn't possibly say no to this person. How could I possibly write back and say, I can't give you a book, I've got no money? That's just too terrible. How can you do that? So slowly it grew, you know. And then within a couple of years, I had 9 full-time staff, $40,000 a month budget. I couldn't sustain it. I was ridiculous. This incredible wish to want to help. It's a brave attitude. You've got to develop it. I'm not saying I'm so special. We had to learn it. And I always remember one time, this is a bodhisattva attitude. You know, Lama Zopa is famous for his giving. He is famous for his generosity in giving. And one time when someone was going to give the prison project some money, she was going to sell her house and give us some money. And she had a crystal and she wanted Lama Zopa to write a mantra on the crystal to help sell the house. And Rinpoche said, don't think of receiving, think of giving. So that sort of became our motto, you know. So you shift your thinking. This is courageous. And this is the attitude of the bodhisattvas. They're courageous. It's my job. It's my job, you know. So I had to develop that. We were forced to develop it. It was a very powerful practice. So in giving. So in our own lives, it's not an easy one. We're all poor. Most of us are poor. But that's really got nothing to do with it. We know some of the richest people in the world are the meanest people in the world. Just because you've got money doesn't mean you're generous. That is an absolute fact, you know. So we have to cultivate generosity. So how do we do it? Well, there's so many simple little methods, you know, to train ourselves in thinking generously, Maybe you haven't got much, but to think, to want to give. We have to train. So one is to be like the Mormons and put 10% into your budget. Have another line item called giving. We have line items called iPhone, mortgage, food, holiday, you know, clothing, medicine. Okay, in England, you don't pay much in the UK, but, you know, whatever. We have all our line items, but then we think, oh, well, if there's anything left over, then I might give. Well, sorry, you won't give if you think that way. You've got to budget it in. That's the first really powerful technique. The next one, this is so embarrassingly simple, and I created it. I've got a copyright on this practice. I'm just joking, but you listen. It's so hilarious. Old-fashioned days, when you get a letter in the mailbox, you know, through the front door, little letter pops on the ground, and you pick up 2 letters, and one is a check for £20, and one is a bill for £20, okay? I have never met a person on the planet yet who, when they see the bill, oh, fantastic, I must pay this bill. Think of what I'm saying. Nobody ever says that. Nobody wants to pay a bill. When we understand the mind is the cause of everything, every time you don't want to give that £20, what do you think you're doing to your own mind? You are blocking receiving. The cause of why we have even access to a grain of rice in this life is our past generosity. As they say in the Lam Rim, as Lama Zopa says, the main cause of getting a human body is the past non-killing. The main cause of being born in an environment where you can have a job and family and a bed to sleep in and credit in the bank and credit cards and all the stuff that we're familiar with, even if we're poor, the cause of that is generosity, giving. We need it even for our own sake. We need to really give, and you've got to start by wanting to give. Your hand will not go in your pocket until your mind decides, I want to give. So train our mind. I want to give. Think about it. I want to give, not just be fearful. I haven't got enough. I can't do it. Somebody else another time, maybe. I wish I could receive. No, think about this. This is profound practice, and it's so simple. It's the first level of this first four perfections. So your mind, you train your mind to think differently. And of course, for your own sake, it opens your mind and you become more happy, more relaxed, more spacious. Not giving, generosity, which means miserly, is a very unhappy mind. You think about it, it's totally self-centered. You're fearful. I never have enough money. I don't have any security. I'm worried about not getting enough. I'm worried about, the number of people I meet, and I'm not trying to, it's just shocking. I never thought about this, who say they get married and have children so that when they get older, they'll be taken care of. I think this is so monstrous. I was shocked. So much fear, The yogis say, if you're really practicing Dharma, if you're really thinking of generosity, practicing morality, practicing all these things we're discussing, the food will roll up the hill to you. Don't just be superstitious about it and just think, oh, well, the food will roll up the hill. Is all the universe will give it to me. Rubbish. No. You're practicing your generosity and your morality kind of creates the cause for your past generosity seeds to ripen as you receiving right now. So generosity for our own sake is an unbelievably powerful practice, but you've got to think of it. Train your mind to think you want to give. Then be reasonable. Yes, you budget it and do proper and treat money with respect. One of the things is some people are really tight with their money and watch every penny, which is good. The other people are really cavalier with their money, thinking they're being so generous, but they don't bother paying their credit card bills. This is beyond shocking. Paying your credit card bills is a powerful practice of generosity. Nobody forced you to borrow from that bank. You are the boss of this. Don't blame the evil banks because they've got big percentages. Yeah, they have, but you agreed to it. So you pay every cent, or you negotiate. Don't just drop the bill. The banks, we know the banks budget in billions of dollars of losses. That's their business. We're talking about our mind, to be pure and moral with every cent, every penny. This is generosity. You open the door, you keep it pure and clear, and then receiving comes easily. In other words, the cause for receiving is giving. There's levels and levels of ordinary life that we never think about, So practice the wish. So have the thought to want to pay your bill the day it arrives. Learn to be happy. Say the words, I'm happy to pay my bill. Then analyze, why should I be happy? Well, guess what? The world has set up all these systems, the banks and all the people who work in the banks, who facilitate your credit, who facilitate your house, your mortgage. Yes, people are making money off it. Aren't we clever in the West? We're very good at commerce, right? I admire. Excellent. But we buy into it. Most of us would be homeless and we couldn't get credit. So how dare we, then not want to pay our bills? You're blocking yourself. You're not going to receive. You're just creating more misery for yourself. So it's incredibly important to pay every bill, to want to pay bills on time, to be very conscious, and just say the thoughts. I'm happy to pay my bill. It doesn't take much effort. It takes as much effort as saying, I don't want to pay my bill. Which is better for your mind? I want to pay my bill. What an amazing thought. You become more courageous. And then when you see homeless people and poor people, you've trained yourself, you'll want to give immediately. It's a powerful practice. It's a powerful practice. Don't underestimate it. But look at the layers of our fear of giving, Analyze, check it out, change your mind. So budget in some giving and decide you want to pay your bills and pay your bills perfectly. And if you go broke, okay, negotiate with the bank. So just drop it. Be moral. It's really shocking not to. And the point is, when you understand karma back in junior school, you are the recipient of the suffering that will come from that. It's not about the money, it's about your mind. This is generosity. This is the first level of generosity, the first level. We're talking at a more advanced level here, but we're talking for our own benefit as much as anything else. And then, of course, is the generosity of giving advice, which is marvelous. And the third, giving protection, is like saving people, taking care of old people, different things like that. Never mind, I've got no time to go on. Next one is morality. Now, this morality, the whole path is a practice of morality. The whole path is ethics. But of course, as we've been saying before, up until now, it's the practice of the morality of refraining from harming, of restraint. Now we actively add to it the proactive action of the morality of benefiting others. Because you've got enough wisdom to know what's going on now. So you're helping others. Your life, it's like generosity, giving things. Now it's giving help. Same thing. You're opening yourself to others. You're training yourself to see yourself as a servant for others. You're training yourself to see that everybody is your child and your job is to help them in whatever way. So who needs help? It's rich people, poor people, sick people, dying people, people in prison. Whoever needs help them. Speaking simply. Next one is patience. And the fourth one's called perseverance. Sometimes we can mix these two, but it's very kind of interesting. So already the whole approach back in the Bodhisattva, the previous level of the Bodhisattva we talked yesterday, finishing today, where it culminates in actually getting bodhicitta, the whole level of practice there called transforming problems into happiness, like what's expressed in the 8 verses. You could argue that's another way of talking about patience. So let's look at particularly patience, the way they call it here, the different levels of patience. So first, what's patience? We've got a really wrong understanding of patience, I think. We think of it as almost like passive aggression, kind of gritting your teeth and waiting for that horrible thing to go away. That's not patience. That's suppressed anger. That's a disaster. Many of us are like that. That's a hopeless thing. That's not patience. Patience is an incredibly brave mind. And you won't understand patience until you've done junior school and high school, where you've learned, first of all, to control your body and speech and don't say the bad words and don't punch the person in the nose. And then in high school, where you've begun to go deeply into what anger is. Anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Anger is like a panic attack because you didn't get what you wanted. Aversion is the bare bones state of mind. It's got the volatile expressions called anger. It's got the mild expressions called annoyance, irritated, upset, frustrated. Most of us feel those things and we would never think they're a problem. We just think they're nothing. Oh, so frustrated. I'm so annoyed. I'm so upset. They're polite words for anger, people. What are you doing to your own mind? And what you're doing, anger is having a panic attack when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Anger is a panic attack when the bad thing happens, because poor attachment can't stand problems. This is so simple, but so profound. And because we're all like it, we think it's normal. In other words, we don't think. We think you'd be abnormal if you didn't have it. Well, Buddha's doing his analysis. Not true. So here, you're proactively greeting the problem. Patience is greeting the problem with a happy mind. You're glad you've got a problem. Okay, that sounds mentally ill to us. And what's the logic of all this? If you're at the gym and you're on your little rowing machine or whatever it is you're on, you know perfectly well, your muscles will not change until you go past your comfort zone. You hop on the rowing and you're really comfy, and then it gets a bit harder and your breathing gets stronger. And then if you imagine, if the moment you started to get uncomfortable, you stopped. This is also to do with the fourth one, enthusiasm. But patience, what I'm getting at is patience here. So attachment doesn't like problems, okay? But there's a benefit in being on that rowing machine because you want to get your muscles all nice and tight. So you are prepared when the pain starts, when the ugly thing happens, you greet it with a happy mind. You're glad. We understand that. That's patience. But you've got to be trained to do that, because the usual response is panic attack. Can't stand it, have a mental breakdown. What do you think depression is? And all these unhappy, ordinary, daily states of mind we all have. There's attachment and aversion running between two like drunken sailors. Or, forget about the violent levels. You mightn't go around killing and raping too many people. But we have depressed, fed up, can't stand it, get angry, upset, shoot the mouth off, because we haven't controlled our body, our speech, or our mind. So here we have controlled our body, speech, and mind, and now we're at this really radical level of happily wanting problems. Why? Because you want to get rid of anger. The quickest way to get rid of anger is to practice patience, baby, to meet people who make you crazy. So the first level of patience is being patient, and the words are so brutal, in the face of abuse. And this is too much. So don't wait till you're abused. Don't wait till you're kind of, beaten up on the street by a maniac to start practicing patience. Practice patience now when your kid doesn't do what you want, when your hubby is annoying you. Practice with the baby things. Get ready, please. You can't run a marathon. Start with your rowing machine and go for 5 minutes over your comfort zone. You start small. That's what practice is. I mean, think about my friend Sonny in prison. Can you only imagine the nightmare? You're innocent, your husband's been executed, his head burst into flames, you've lost your children, your parents died, you're completely innocent, and you're in a cell on your own 23 hours a day with a Bible. Can try and imagine the nightmare. Talk about patience. The normal one will be like the other bloke I described. You go completely out of your brain with rage. So patience, you see, when we hear patience, we hear passivity. This is our biggest problem. That's gross misunderstanding. Patience is a proactive, courageous mind. My friend Sunny, when she was in her cell, she said, she talked about her methods of using in her own mind how to deal with this nightmare. She said, for example, like when she was really practicing and doing her yoga and realizing she could change her mind and realizing that she didn't want to go crazy because she didn't want to suffer. She'd give herself 5 minutes, she said, to be angry, and then she'd stop. So she had incredible power of her mind, So anger is like, how dare this happen? This should not be happening. This is wrong. I do not want it. We go, literally, that's what insanity is. When we can't cope with the bad things. Look at the world. That's why we're suffering, not to criticize. This is why we suffer. Because we can't cope with bad things. We go completely mad. That's because of attachment. If we didn't have attachment, we wouldn't have anger. Not possible. Impossible. Impossible. Attachment, anger is a response. When the little hungry little junkie in here, the poor suffering little me, doesn't get what it wants. So patience is an incredibly powerful attitude, incredibly brave, courageous mind. It's like welcoming the problem, greeting it, confronting it. I mean, many people, one way we deal with suffering is we scream and shout and yell when we don't get what we want. Other people, some of you, are more quiet. You suppress. This is at least you don't harm others. You should be happy you don't harm others. But it's like a nightmare. It's got to come out somewhere. You can't suppress. Nothing can be made go away. So it just comes up in other ways until you go crazy, So patience is confronting the problem when it arises. Now, can you imagine, since we're little girls and boys, if we were able to do that, listen to my point, we would never have, what do we call it? PSDS. What's it called? Post-traumatic stress syndrome, right? Yes. That's suppressed suffering, isn't it? You've lived in denial of it. And we think that's normal behavior. No, some people are able to confront their suffering. Those 2 young nuns came out of that prison, I promise you. Sunny did not have post-stress business because she confronted it and worked with it at the time. This is the point. This is Buddha's amazing teachings. When we deal with things as they happen, which is what we're aiming for, there will never be suffering. You've got to understand the logic of this. But we concretize all this stuff in the West and just laugh at this as if it's not possible. This is patience. It's unbelievable. But you've got to be ready for it. Patience isn't passive aggression. If I'm still at the first level of my relationship with Fred and I'm a complete victim and overwhelmed, but I'm a very quiet person, and I sit there and put up with his punches but I'm going mad inside, that's not practicing patience. That's why one day you'll be 27 years later, you'll find yourself stabbing him 27 times and wonder what happened because you suppressed all those years. That's not patience. That's not healthy. It's a disaster. Patience is a proactive choice, like my friend Sunny said in prison, to see the problem. And this is the point. And this is putting emptiness into it, which we're getting to. Better not forget emptiness. That when you see the problem and you confront it, not panic and push it away, which is what anger does. When you see it and you analyze it, suddenly the whole problem dissipates. This is fact. This is truth. This is scientific. This is applying emptiness. We're going to get to that. So patience is unbelievable. It's a clear, conscious, intelligent state of mind, the opposite to attachment and anger. So there's more to it than that. There's no time. The fourth one is very powerful. It's called enthusiasm, joyful effort. This is the most advanced, most difficult of these four, and the most necessary. Basically, it's sort of a continuation of patience. The way to understand it very clearly is to understand the opposite, which is called laziness, which sounds very shocking. And again, it's all related to attachment, everything is. So the first kind of laziness is I can't be bothered. We're completely familiar with this, but analyze it. What is the thing you can't be bothered doing? The thing that takes effort. And what is it that takes effort is the thing that attachment doesn't want. Attachment is the junkie in us at the most primordial level that wants to stay in its comfort zone. We know this. It's primordial. We can't stand getting what attachment doesn't want, which is to get uncomfortable, mentally, physically. So the grossest laziness is really obvious. I can't be bothered. That gives rise to this next one, which is it's often taught in the same way as the first one, at the same time, but it's like another level. And this is a tricky, wicked one because it sounds virtuous. Oh, I'm too busy. I'll do it later. This is something we absolutely love to do. And this is the tragic one. We end up carrying around like a turtle, our house of all the undone jobs, the things we've put off doing, the things we procrastinated doing. We know we are so burdened by that. So what is it you put off doing is the thing, again, that takes too much effort. And what is the thing that takes too much effort? What attachment doesn't want. So we've got to be so conscious, but this one is a liar. Oh, and it's also quick. It happens in like a millisecond. You see the job, and we're talking ordinary samsaric jobs here. Forget Dharma. We're talking Dharma here, really. We know this in our ordinary life. You know that job is there, and you see it, and in a millisecond, because you don't want to do it, it takes effort, and because attachment's not happy. So you say, oh, I'll do it, and you get yourself off the hook. I'll do it later. At least if you're honest, you say, I can't be bothered, but we don't. I'll do it later. But we know later never comes. We know that. And we always also know that when you do the job, you can't believe how it took you 20 minutes and the relief is incredible. We know this. This is a powerful one we've all got because of attachment. But we lie to ourselves. I'm busy. I can't do it. So this is where that really what it means is we haven't prioritized. So we're talking our practice here, whatever level you practice. Even if we've got a 10-minute practice in the morning and a 10-minute practice at night, forget about working on your mind throughout the day. Look how hard it is for every one of us. It's just really difficult to do our practice, even relatively nicely, especially if we're very busy with other things. So we've got to prioritize. We've got to be disciplined and prioritize it and don't lie to ourselves. But the point is also we know, like in the gym, like on the rowing machine, if you make effort, which means you go past your comfort zone, that's when the muscles start changing. Same with our mind. In other words, all of this implies, it demands incredible awareness of our tricky mind, Of course, you then go incremental. You don't suddenly do 400 rows and collapse yourself. You don't suddenly try to meditate for 5 hours at once. You'll collapse. You go gradually, incrementally, step by step, one step at a time. Now, the third kind of laziness, it sounds hilarious, but this is the deepest one. Not possible. I can't achieve that. Impossible. I can't do that. Not possible. I can't do that. So that's something, this brings me back to the prisoners. We had to work with this one. At the time when these prisoners started writing, Arturo wrote, I sent him a book, a friend wrote, another friend, and every time another letter would come, the first instinct was, I can't do that. It's not possible. I can't do it. And that's when we start to change. I've got a person to help me. I paid $5 an hour. She started to wrap the books because we start to change our mind. The letter was on the table. The first impulse was there wasn't the money. I can't do it. There's no time because, Mandela took up a lot of time, blah, blah, blah. Naturally, I'm busy, naturally. But I had to change my thought. I had to change. I had to stop saying I can't do it. I can do it. So that's what you do. You've got to say, I can do it. You can't do everything perfectly. But the thought, I can do it, is a profound thought. I can't do it just closes the door and you'll never try. You'll never take the first step. But if you say, I can do it, you'll take the first step. And the more we understand dependent arising, which we're going to get to, maybe we have to have another day, Lynn. We're running out of time now. It's okay. the more we understand dependent arising, the more we won't just say, I can't do it. Of course, you can't be like Federer. If you're sitting there watching television with a friend and your friend goes, oh, look at Federer, that's impossible. I can't do that. And so they don't even try. But you go, oh, I'd love to be like Federer. I can do it. Then you will open the door and then you'll start. We understand that process. It all starts step by step. So that's what we give up. I can't do it. I can't be bothered. I'm too busy. And anyway, I can't do it. That's why we never achieve anything. We know this. But this is really clear thinking, these 3 different levels, you know. And we're talking Dharma practice here. Of course, we do put effort into lots of other things. I'm talking about the gym as an analogy because that's samsara. We're talking non-samsaric activity here. We put masses of effort into all the samsaric things. We put masses of effort into keeping our houses and working hard on our job and getting all the right food and the nutrition and the body. I'm not trying to be heavy with this. We do, because we can see the benefit. And this is the point that all the Lamas say. You will not make effort until you know the benefits. When you know the benefits, you will make effort. So this is really crucial. And of course, it's hard to see the benefits of working on your mind. Of course, it's hard to see the benefits of having practice every day because the benefits come slowly. Of course, it's hard. Oh my God. But if we don't know the benefits of something, why would you bother doing it? You know, we all know the benefit of making money. We all know the benefit of getting thin. We all know the benefit of chocolate. And even then it's still hard to control ourselves, even in samsara, you know. So perseverance, joy, eventually it is joyful. In the beginning, it's not joyful, that's for sure. That's why we love that's why His Holiness, since he's 15 years old, since he's born, he hasn't stopped and he's still joyful. It's effortless for him. Lama Zopa, he's in bliss, you know, all the time. He laughs, cracks jokes all the time. Even when he's sick, when he had a stroke, he was laughing, joyful. It's like ridiculous, these people, you know, you can't even imagine they're real. But they're powerful examples showing me what I can do. That's the point, you know. So before we go into now, finally, with 1 hour to go, dependent arising and emptiness, let's ask see if there's any questions. Oh, no, I've got 2 more hours. That's right, this afternoon. I forgot. I mean, for my afternoon, whatever. Oh, I forgot. Oh, good. Okay, so questions. Come on. Questions. Any questions so far? If not, that's fine. Kimberly, darling, what is it?
Unmute. I was listening to, I'm very interested in the stories you were talking about the nuns, for example, that had been through torture and rape, and they had compassion for their torture.
That's right.
And I really want to understand what the secret of that is, because when you were
understanding karma, darling, Kimberly's understanding karma back in junior school, when we got you see, again, let's analyze it, Kimberly. Deep in our bones right now, if we've never heard of karma, it's not our philosophy, then we're brought up with the view that we didn't ask to get born. First, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Second, either God made us or mummy and daddy. Other people made us. Do you agree with that?
Not anymore.
No, but see my point.
But yes.
Intellectually, we now have another view, but still experientially, ego still believes the other one. That's the point. It takes time to change, sweetheart. The assumption of ego grasping, the deepest illusion in our bones, is that we're innocent victims, is that we don't deserve suffering. That's why we feel it automatically, because we've practiced that in countless lives. So it won't change overnight, Kimberly, so just keep moving. Those young women have brought up with karma. That's been in the bones of their being since they were born. Can you hear my point, darling? It's training your mind. So you got the view now, first intellectually, but keep practicing it. Keep using it as an analysis of what your suffering is and why it is. But remember the good things too. Yeah. Then slowly, I can see myself. I'm no great practitioner, I promise, but I've got confidence in this path. This is my path, my working hypothesis. And because I have to shout these words out to people for the last, Lama Zopa told me to teach since 87. So I've been blurting these words out of my mouth for 30 plus years. So slowly the penny's dropping for me. And I can tell you with certainty that I love my father who sexually abused me. I love my father. I love my father. I understand that we have a karmic connection. I understand that I must have created the cause, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. But even as a little girl, I loved him. Even as a little girl, I had a bit of anger, but not too much. I was able to see his suffering. That's just how fortunate I am, you know. I got raped one time. I'm not going to go into the gross story, but I became the boss. These poor boys freaked out. I'm not going to rape after, I promise you. And I got held up with a gun one time. My nature, I mean, in the end, I was the one who came out of the victor. So, you know, so when we understand karma, and this just must have been in my mind in the past, that enables you to not be a victim, then you don't suffer, then it's easy to see. And when you have karma, it informs your whole way of interpreting it. So there's no suffering. It's logical, but it's one step at a time, darling.
Yeah. I guess for me is when you were talking about post-traumatic stress during the process of this injury, getting to the United States, it's like having a broken neck in your house for like a year and a half. Like,
yes, of course, unbelievable. Of course.
And so I'm totally proud of making it through that. And
amazing. That's right.
And it's amazing, but I didn't have the response and I don't have the response that I wish I had, but I don't, that I have compassion for the system that missed the injury. I don't
come in time, Kimberly. Wait, one step at a time. If you have confidence in this path, this way of interpreting things, it takes time to unpack and unravel old assumptions. It just takes time, sweetheart. It just takes time, Kimberly. You can't force yourself beyond a point that you're not. But by understanding something theoretically, you slowly start to internalize it, one precious step at a time. Meanwhile, have compassion for yourself and be, you know, and take care of yourself and look after yourself and deal with it and deal with the stress and the trauma and the drama. All of this, sweetheart. I mean, by talking about those nuns, it's just an example of people who have been capable, showing us it's possible. I'm not trying to show off when I give my examples. I'm a maniac still and have, you know, all the usual delusions everybody else has. But for whatever reason in my life, when it's come to certain violent things like this, it hasn't been so traumatic for me. Whatever reason, my mind, I'm just giving it as an example. So what I learned when I didn't have the view of karma then, but with the view of karma now, I understand those things. And so that with the view of karma, you take responsibility because you caused all your happiness. Every bit of happiness you've got is what you caused, Kimberly. Every second that good things happen, all the doctors you have, the kindness you have, the fact you have a bed, money in the bank, loving people, every second of one of those events, you caused them. So stop thinking about the bloody bad things that you caused. Start thinking about the good things that you've got, which you caused. That's empowering.
Thank you very much.
You can hear me.
I'm thinking empowering. I'm like,
that's it, darling. That's the one, sweetheart. One step at a time, Kimberly. Meanwhile, take care of yourself.
It's taking care of its own self. I just have to.
You're doing great. You're amazing. You're doing great.
Thank you.
Good, sweetheart. What else, people?
Brian has a question for you, Venerable.
Good. Yes. Please talk to me. Where are you? Brian. Yes, sweetheart. Talk to me, Brian. You have to unmute. Is it Brian, you said? Brian?
Yes, Brian has his hand up. So
I know, but that's okay. Maybe later then. Anybody else? No? Okay, so let's continue then. So they're the first, I'm just talking really briefly, those four, okay, really brief, just leading us now to the last two perfections. So those four, the bodhisattva who's got this bodhicitta goes from life after life after life, practicing, perfecting these. And at the same time, hooking sentient beings, making karmic connection with sentient beings. The reason we meet anybody is because we've met them before. The reason anyone does anything to us is because we have done that before. We are the boss in all this entire process. We've created the cause for whatever arises in our lives, all the obstacles, and we have created the cause for all the happiness, that whatever arises in our lives. We are the cause of this. Our actions are the main cause of this. So every second we meet anybody, we create a karmic connection with them. So bodhisattvas are dying to help all these sentient beings. They can't lead them all to enlightenment today because the people aren't ready. So they can connect with them. And then 42 lives later, they meet them. Now, the Dalai Lama, for example, I like a good example. Millions of us on this planet like the Dalai Lama, right? Some might be Buddhist, some might be not Buddhist. Millions can't stand him. The Chinese communists, they have a panic attack every time they hear his name. So we could argue the Dalai Lama to the degree that the number of people connect with him, like him or don't like him, is an indication of his own personal hard work, hooking each one of us eyeball to eyeball over countless lifetimes. Okay, we've got a karmic connection with him. So as soon as we met, we hear him, we see his name, we fell into his lap. Equally, the people who can't stand him. So the ones of us who adore him and think he's wonderful, he must have done good things to help us, because bodhisattvas are pretty outrageous. They will do whatever it needs to help sentient beings. They will be rough, they will be sweet, they will be heavy, they will harm you, they will help you in order to hook you. They'll do whatever it needs to be done because they're not coming from ego. So I always use an example. When my mother met Lama Yeshe, I wanted to meet Lama when I was in Melbourne, and I was doing a party. My mother was doing a party to raise money for Kopan, and I wanted her to meet him. So she met him, but she made her very nervous. My mother is very proud. She's a wonderful mother. She had 7 children, worked so hard, And anyway, I wanted her to meet him. But he made her nervous because he's very charismatic. And my mother normally was always in charge of everything. She ran the show. People always came to her with their problems. She never told anybody her problems. But somehow she became very vulnerable with Lama. She started pouring out her feelings about me. We had a very intense relationship, So she became very vulnerable. And then she came out of that meeting. I remember I met her. I wasn't there. And I tell her heart was very open, but she was mad at Lama. Oh, he kept watching the television while he was talking to me. He kind of really upset her. She couldn't forget him. Now, this is the story. And she always talk about, she's a friend of Adele Hulse, who wrote Big Love, that book about Lama Yeshe. We went to school together. And so Adele and my mother were good friends. They'd gossip together and drink sherry. And Adele would tell me that my mother would always say, oh, that Yeshe. So I think, oh God, she's criticizing a Buddha, whatever. But I heard this lovely story. And there's always these endless stories about bodhisattvas, because he's bopping along from life after life after life, hooking sentient beings, eyeball to eyeball, hooking them. So when he meets them in future lives, he can lead them to enlightenment, like the Dalai Lama. Millions of people adore him now. So this bodhisattva, the best way to hook anybody is the best method is peaceful methods, be sweet. But some people are hard-headed and can't be hooked, can't be helped. So they need wrathful methods. So this village, some dude, he's like a regular dude. You wouldn't know he's a bodhisattva. He's not walking around with a halo, but he's a bodhisattva on his path, and he's hooking all these. He's connected with all the people in the village, and they think he's lovely. But there's one old lady didn't notice him, and he couldn't leave her behind. He needed to make a karmic connection, but he didn't know how to get her, to hook her. But he realized she had this beautiful garden, so he rode his horse through her garden. Well, now she noticed him, I promise. Shaking your fist and shouting and yelling. And of course, he ran out of town, and probably the villagers thought he was terrible, but he was happy because he'd made a karmic connection with her. She'd noticed him. And as the Lama who told the story said, there's a saying in Tibetan, you hear it in different ways. When it comes to connecting with a bodhisattva, it's better to have a bad karmic connection, like she did, shouted and yelled at him, than to have no connection. So my feeling was Lama just kind of upset her somehow. That means she would not forget him. If she'd sat running that meeting and being, yes, he just sat there sweetly, she wouldn't remember him, but her ego was affected. So he got her. Lama hooked my mother. So what am I telling you this for? Because Bodhisattva is going from life to life to life to life to life to life, hooking sentient beings, hooking. So he must have used pretty wrathful methods, the Dalai Lama, to hook the Chinese communists, because he's got them. They love him. They hate him, but he's got them. So he's going to drag him to enlightenment in 47 lifetimes. Anyway, that's their job. And then finally, in their meditation, they are perfecting wisdom. Okay, let's look at that. See, the 5th one is single point of concentration. You've got to have that. So like I said earlier, that's the Theravada teaching. That's in Wisdom Wing. That's in high school. That's even coming from the Hindus, actually. They invented it. These genius Indians, before the Buddha, they invented this brilliant skill to get your mind to a subtle level that we don't even posit as existing in modern neuroscience and psychology. This is crucial, and as Lama Yeshe talks about in Mahamudra, which I highly recommend you read, it's about these 2 modes of meditation. But it's a particular approach called Mahamudra, which is related to realizing emptiness. It's a very specific approach. It's very delicious, though. Mahamudra, how to develop our true nature. So concentration is this crucial technique that you've got to have first. It's known as calm abiding, which is the name given to the end result. Shamatha in Sanskrit. Broadly, it's a state of samadhi, which is concentration. Okay, so you've got to get this. As Lama says in Mahamudra, it is impossible to get to the second one, which is called developing insight. Into what? Here, special insight, meaning insight into ultimate reality. So there it's called emptiness. We're going to discuss this. This is where everything is leading to this. So you can't realize emptiness with, in other words, you can't realize emptiness with a gross level of mind because the delusions are so deep. So you've got to have this subtle level of concentration. It's like the microscope of your mind. And like I'm saying, it's a level of cognition, a level of a mental state of subtlety that is not even posited as existing in modern psychology and neuroscience because it's got nothing to do with the brain. It's a subtler level of mind. So Lama talks about this in Mahamudra and gives some of the examples of what you'd be like, some of your qualities. If you achieved this, it gives you great courage, you know. The potential of our mind is unbelievable before we even realize emptiness. What time is it? 9:15, 10. Okay. So concentration. So basically, we'll talk about that very briefly. As we all know, in the sutra teachings, it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivating. And the essential thing you're trying to accomplish is just described in terms of trying to completely conquer one tendency of the mind, which is to be completely out of control. We know that all day. Our mind is out of control. It's normal. Normal meaning everyone's like it, but it's for us in our culture, it's so normal that we don't, and we just think you'd be abnormal if you didn't have a crazy mind. I mean, it's just the way it is because we don't have techniques in our culture to steady, you know, this uncontrolled mind. That's why we're all using the Buddhist view now, you know, more and more people are looking into this mindfulness business. But the Buddha's got these techniques that we can act, and this is what Lama talks about in Mahamudra. It sounds like science fiction, you know, that you can have absolute, effortless, brilliant control over every tiny thought. And in your daily life, you can't even conceive of this. It's like an impossibility, but this is exactly what we're capable of with this single point of concentration. Your mind will be absolutely blissful all the time. It sounds hilarious. It sounds ridiculous, in fact. We can't even imagine it. You'd have clairvoyance. This is natural. We've had that countless lives. We've had shamatha in countless lives, Buddha says, but we haven't used it to realize emptiness. So we keep falling down the mountain. But one of the natural states of our mind, this is very encouraging, is to be blissful. The extent to which we're not attached, angry, jealous, berserk, out of control, is the extent to which our mind is peaceful and joyful. Lama talks about these levels of ecstasy. This sounds hilarious to us. But it's not like the berserk way we think about it. The mind is so peaceful. These are states of mind we don't posit as existing. It's very encouraging to read about it. So basically in concentration, what you're trying to do is subdue this one berserk, the tendency for the mind to be berserk. And the other tendency, which is the opposite, is the tendency for the mind to be completely dull. So you know very well your own self if you sit there to meditate. What's going on with my screen? Oh, look at this. It's dark as anything. That's my screen. It's not your screen, though, is it? Okay, we're fine. Okay, so we know in daily life. So you sit down and meditate. We know any kind of meditation. You either go complete berserk and you can't control a single thought, or you go to sleep. They're the two complete extremes, aren't they? So what you're trying to do in these 9 stages of cultivation at an ever more sophisticated level is to not buy into these two extremes, these two berserkness and it gets ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, until eventually you've got complete, effortless, spontaneous, total, subtle control over your mind. It's effortless, you know. And then Lama talks about some of the qualities you'd accomplish. So it's this gradual process. And even if you're in the West, you know, ordinary person like you and me, to be really accomplished, to just even get to the point of wanting to go to achieve this, you can't just achieve it at home. Like Venerable Rene is a great example. What I told you when I interviewed him in 1995. Maybe I didn't tell you, somebody else. I always forget. Did I mention Venerable Rene? I did, I think. I interviewed him in 1995 in Mandalay about one of his 2.5-year retreats. And he's still a retreater these years later. It was 2.5 years of attempting to get single point of concentration. And he said there's no way in the world he was even prepared to even go to get to that retreat where you sit there 12 hours a day doing these sessions. Unless he'd been a monk, living in vows, done lots of purification, lots of purification practices, living in vows, listening to lots of teachings and even giving lots of teachings. That was his preparation. He said there's no way without all of that he would have been able to get there, to even have the will and the courage, and they're my words, and the perseverance to stick to it day after week after month after year. The prerequisites just to be ready are already incredible, So, but we can start somewhere. We can do 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, Of course we can. But the techniques are there. So we can't actually realize emptiness. We can't cut the deepest delusion from the mind with the grosser level of mind. But we can start by doing what we're doing now, which is being conceptual. You've got to start somewhere. Conceptuality is a stepping stone. You can't play Bach until you've learned all those complicated theories. You can't make a cake until you've learned the theory of the recipe. It's very obvious. Because we live at a conceptual level, we've got to use that level to go to the non-conceptual level, which is the experiential. So we've got to have concentration. So then we use that to whatever degree we have it to do our analysis, to do our meditation in the 6th of the 6 perfections, which is called special insight, vipassana. So in the world, there's almost like a separate religion now called vipassana. It means insight. And in English, this is a great word. But because we hear these Sanskrit words and we mystify meditation, we get very, very confused in what they mean, Insight is a great word in English. In some languages, I notice, like Italian and Spanish, they don't have a word that they use in everyday life. Insight. But you listen to it. It's a very clear word. You're thinking of a problem. You're working out what's the problem with the cake, or what's the problem with why the car doesn't work, and you're thinking it through. And then you go, oh, I got a bit of an insight into that problem. We get the meaning of the word insight. Insight is a lovely word. Inner seeing. It's really perfect. Don't mystify it. Something clicks, the penny drops, you worked it out, you got it, you understand something. Well, at an ordinary level, when you study the theory of music and then you play the piano, the theory of music is you start listening to the theories. Then what do? You go to the piano and you get insight into it by practicing until eventually it becomes spontaneous. You go from theoretical to experiential. That's ordinary knowledge. We all know that. So insight's like the experiential knowledge. That's all. That's all it's referring to. But the trouble is we mystify this word meditate. So the verb in Tibetan is very telling. The verb to meditate in Tibetan, gom, it means to familiarize. To familiarize your mind with what? Well, it's called learning. So think simply, I use the dumbest examples. You go to school, your teacher tells you 1 + 1 is 2. She gives you a theory. You've never heard it before. And she says, go home and do your homework, Robina. What does she want you to do? You listen, it's so obvious. If she were using the Buddhist as an analogy, you'd go home. She'd say, I want you to go home, Robina, close the door, get your room quiet, close the door, and then I want you to do a bit of concentration, get your concentration meditation going. So your mind's focused, get a bit of focus. And then you go to the second mode of meditation. And then I want you to think through this problem, 1 + 1 is 2. And I want you to get an insight into it. That's called doing your homework. We get that. You get your musical theory. It's all these weird concepts. And then you go home and you think it through first on the paper. And then you go to the piano and you get an experience of it. We learn everything like that. But when we hear insight and we hear concentration, we hear meditate, we hear analytical meditation, we just get so confused because we misunderstand these concepts. So what are we discussing here? The goal is to have an experience of the reality, the ultimate reality, that nothing has an intrinsic nature. Okay, already that's complicated. 1 + 1 is 2 is not too bad. This is a theory we've never heard of. What do you mean? Ultimately, nothing has an intrinsic nature. God Almighty, what am I supposed to do with that? We better learn it first, hadn't we? You can't just say, oh, 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 2, and hope the penny drops. You've got to squeeze your brain and understand the theory theoretically. And then by practicing, aha, oh, mummy, now I get it. Same here. So you've got to get some concentration. You've been to your class. You've heard your dependent arising. We're going to discuss that. That's the king of logics to prove emptiness. Then you go home and you get your focus, sit on your cushion and you get a bit of focus. You've got to get your focus first. Then you use that focus to whatever degree you've got it, and you go to your second mode, and now you take the information you learned in your class about dependent arising, and if it's in your mind, even better, but if it's on your book, that's fine, in your notes. And then what you do is, with that focused mind, you then do a bit of analysis. We all know that the Tibetans use the term analytical meditation. Well, meditate means become familiar, right? Familiarize your mind. And analysis is a fancy Greek word for the activity of thinking about something. But it's clear thinking, isn't it? You just don't go in meditation, oh, 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 2, hoping the penny will drop. You don't just go, everything is empty of intrinsic nature, everything is empty of intrinsic nature. No, that's idiocy. What are you going to do? You're going to use your noggin. You're going to use the theories. You're going to think about something. So this is the point now. You don't think about emptiness. You think about dependent arising, which is the logic that proves emptiness. So the thinking you do is 1 + 1. You've got to know what 1 means. You've got to know what plus means. You've got to know what equals means. And you've got to know what 2 means. You've got the theories. And then you think it through logically. You use your little bricks, you use this. And then at some point, suddenly the penny drops. Oh, I get it now. And then that's the insight. Well, the same here. So you don't think about emptiness. You think about the king of logics. There's many logics you use, and we're going to discuss. But the king of logics is you think about how things are dependent arising. But it's got to be very coherent thinking, not just vaguely. You got to have listened to those words in the teachings, and then you think it through. Well, if this is this, and therefore this, and because of this, and this, and this, and therefore this, and then the conclusion is aha. The aha moment, the insight is, oh, therefore there's no intrinsic I. So that's the conclusion that you come to from thinking about, in this case, dependent arising, which we're going to talk about. Are we communicating, people? Okay, so now let's look into what dependent arising is and why we have to prove that nothing has an intrinsic nature, and what does it mean, and why is it then, when we've got that we're out of samsara? Not fully yet, but we cut the root. We can't fall back after that. Why is that? Well, we've been training our minds already, haven't we? Go through these different stages. So what we learned in high school, in middle scope, is that the branch delusions, the attachment and anger and all the other dramas, which are the voices of the root delusion, we start to look at how they are exaggerations. They are distorted conceptions. They exaggerate, they embellish, they add bells and whistles onto things. As Lama Zopa says, delusions, ego grasping, attachment, anger, jealousy, and all the 84,000 other ones, what they do when they're in the mind is exaggerate. Let's say we've got the thermos. There's a thermos. So, okay, now before we get there. Okay, so now, what we're trying to do here, we're trying to prove that nothing has an intrinsic nature. We're trying to prove that everything lacks inherent existence. These are synonyms. We're trying to prove that everything that exists doesn't exist inherently. We're trying to prove that everything is empty of intrinsic existence. There's different ways of saying the same thing. Lack, empty of, absent, all mean the same thing. So delusions, as Lama Zopa says, decorate on top of what does exist conventionally, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. So like we discussed it with the thermos, we have to first establish, if we're going to discuss how things exist ultimately, the crucial point is, and this is where dependent arising comes in, the king of logics, it implies we have to establish first conventionally what does exist. These are the two truths. There's a conventional phenomenon called a thermos. Don't believe it. So your mummy says, I say to my mummy, what's that, mummy? She'll say, it's called a thermos. Then I'll ask her to tell me what it is. This is pretty obvious. What is it? What's its meaning? What's its function? What does it do? What is it? This is a powerful concept. She'll say, well, sweetheart, it keeps well, you can see it's this flat-bottomed metal container. Now, that's the first part of the definition of a thermos. It tells you its conventional characteristics. So we have to establish something as existing conventionally before we can look into its ultimate reality. And we've got to be on the same page. What's a computer? A couch? Everything. The Buddha would say, when you study Buddhist philosophy, you learn various synonyms for that which exists. Phenomenon, object, object of knowledge, existent, established base, at least 5 there. They're all different terms used to refer to whatever exists. And why does Buddha want us to know about this? Because he says, right now, babies, you're living in la-la land about what exists and what doesn't. Where delusions make up things that don't exist. This is why we suffer. This is exactly his point across the board. So we better establish first what does exist conventionally. And then we have to analyze and discuss and unpack and unravel its ultimate existence. How does it exist actually? Something like that, you know. So we've got to start on the same page. What's a thermos, mummy? Well, it's this flat bottom metal container, number 1 part of the definition. The second part, the crucial piece, is it tells you its function, its job. Sweetheart, it holds my tea. Now, don't just believe her. We'll believe everything anyone tells us is why we're living in trouble. We believe anything. I say, I love you, and you say, yeah, and I love you, and we actually think we're communicating. Don't be ridiculous. If you wrote your definition and your expectations and I wrote mine, we're talking 2 different languages. No wonder we argue. So we've got to be on the same page first conventionally. So my mother will tell me what it is and tell me keeps her tea warm. Don't just believe her. She's got to prove it. This is really powerful. This is called establishing something as existing conventionally. So she will prove it. She'll pour the tea in. We'll put the lid on. We'll leave it for 3 hours, and we'll come back and we'll find the tea is still hot. She just proved that it fit the definition. This is vital important. But still not satisfied. Still shouldn't accept it yet. She's got to now make sure, I've got to make sure, once I tick the box and agree with her and shake hands and accept that that's a thermos, is to make sure there's no other definition or other, way of defining it in our regular world where we all agree with things, So no, once we've established this, then we can tick the box, shake hands, sign off. We now agree what a thermos is. Now we can begin to understand what it is ultimately. So there's the 2 truths. So right now, the 2 truths for the Buddha, there's different ways of describing, but here the discussion is that everything exists conventionally has this ultimate characteristic. So right now, though, the term for conventional existence is dependent arising or interdependence or dependent origination, dependent arising. And the Buddha would teach 3 levels of dependent arising. There are hundreds of ways in which things exist interdependently, but there are 3 particular ways he discusses that are arguments with the views that prevailed at the time. So the first one, like we've discussed with karma, is the very first level of dependent arising, is that all impermanent phenomena come into existence in dependence upon causes. Already, as I said back in karma, loosening the grip of ego grasping that thinks that I'm an intrinsic, self-existent, concrete, solid, findable, pointable, set in stone, moi. Already karma loosens the grip of that one. So the first one is cause and effect. The second one, and that's arguing with a view that there's an inherent, a permanent, uncaused lump called me, which is a soul, an atman, a self. An essence, the Greeks call it an essence. So I'm kind of conflating a bit the second one and the first one. So the second one is the one I want to go into. It's a very delicious one, which finally gets us to the final one, the actual one, the real meaning of dependent arising, which really gets us to realize emptiness. So the second one is very tasty. First one is things come into existence in dependence upon causes. The second one, things exist in dependence upon their parts, their bits and pieces. Everything is made up of bits and pieces. So initially we go, yeah, who cares? But this is arguing with a view that a self is an intrinsic, is a unitary, solitary thing that doesn't have parts. Buddha says, what a load of nonsense. It's not a possibility. These are serious, philosophical positions, not just to be scoffed at. These amazing Indians were geniuses. So let's look at this one. This is very tasty. Okay. There's trillions of phenomena that exist in the universe, and every day we're creating new ones, aren't we? I always think since Steve Jobs came along, I think we've probably doubled or tripled the phenomena that exist in the universe. Just the apps alone is millions of new things that didn't exist before apps came along. Think about it. All these concepts we've made up since technology, trillions of new phenomena. Every day we're creating new phenomena, which already proves emptiness. We make them all. We establish things, we create things, then we believe in them. So there are millions of phenomena. Now, one of those phenomena is called a me, an I, a person, a self. These are all synonyms. Person, I, me, myself, self, they're all synonyms. And a dog is a person, a Buddha is a person, a hell being is a person, a human is a person, an ant is a person. Person and self and I are all synonymous, okay? Conventionally speaking, as terms. And they refer to a certain phenomenon. And we're examples of one of those. We're not dogs. We're not we're not toilets. We're not, we treat ourselves like a toilet sometimes. We're not thermoses. We're not, computers. We're a person. That's the term we use to refer to this type of phenomenon that we are, okay? So there is a person conventionally. There is a person conventionally, dependent arising person. Now, this is the thing. The delusion here that's functioning is called simply ignorance, ma rigpa in Tibetan. It's the root delusion, such that when it's uprooted by realizing that it doesn't exist, that's the beginning of the end of samsara. So, because this ignorance ignorance is a simple word. And if we had ordinary simple ignorance, which is merely, I don't know, if that was the level of ignorance we had about this, how things exist, we'd all become a Buddha in a couple of years. It wouldn't be complicated. If I merely don't know that that's black, what color is that, Robina? I don't know. There's a space in my mind and you'll fill it with the truth and you'll tell me it's black and I'll go, thank you very much. And now I know. That's easy to fix. But if I believe this is pink, and have believed it's pink since beginningless time, so much so that whenever black appears, I believe it's pink, it appears pink, and nothing in the universe will tell me otherwise. That's double trouble ignorance, isn't it? Not only do I not know the reality, which is that it's black, I believe in a lie. Well, that's the problem with this ignorance. This ignorance not only doesn't know the reality that Buddha tells us, which we've got to prove, that there is no intrinsic I. Not only do we not know there is no intrinsic I, we believe the exact opposite, that there is an intrinsic I. We believe in that. Everything is existing on the basis of that belief since eons of time, all the construct of all the realms of existence, all our attachment and anger and the jealousy and the dramas. These are all the players that have constructed universes, constructed samsara, constructed our suffering over eons of time, or the basis of the belief that there's an intrinsic I. I mean, the words sound kind of cute, but to think the entire universe is the result of it is sort of fascinating because minds make up everything, remember? So not only do we not know the truth that there is no intrinsic I, that there's a dependent, not only do we not know the truth that there's a dependent arising I, we believe there's an independent I. There's another way of putting it. So we've got to strip away the lie. And that's why practice is so painful, because we are addicted to our belief. If people start telling you it's not pink, you're so attached to it being pink, you have a panic attack every time you think it's not pink. This is how ego works. Ego grasping, the root delusion, the colloquial term for ignorance when it's clinging to the I, is rooted in fear. As Lama says in Mahamudra, when you realize emptiness, there is no fear. This is a very shocking idea. All the delusions are rooted in fear, which is why we suffer. That's their character. Attachment, anger, anxiety, jealousy, depression, and low self-esteem, they're all lies. And we believe in these lies, and that's why there's got so much fear. And we're trying to sustain and uphold a lie. It's like exhausting being in samsara, So the first truth is dependent arising, shorthand for the way things exist conventionally. The other truth, the ultimate, is the shorthand is called simply emptiness. This is a shorthand. Dependent arising, emptiness. Conventional, ultimate. Just a way of talking. Now, but right now, we have in our minds, deep in our bones, the two extreme views, the two wrong views. So every time we hear that there is no intrinsic I or thermos, whatever it might be, there is no intrinsic thermos, or there's no, let's just stick to the I, there's no intrinsic I is empty of existing from its own side. When we hear that, we hear there is no I, and we chuck the baby out with the bathwater. As Tsongkhapa says, we fall into the abyss of the great mistake. And we assume it means nothingness. This is the greatest mistake. This is the commonest misinterpretation in the literature, in our minds, when we hear the word emptiness. This is the greatest mistake we can make. So Tsongkhapa is telling us that by understanding this emptiness in the framework of conventional reality is the way to guarantee you don't fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Because right now, when we hear empty, we hear nothing. Oh, well, there's no I might as well kill myself anyway. Or we say, oh, it's all empty anyway, so it doesn't matter. That's nihilism, and it is not the right interpretation. And then we hear dependent arising, that Buddha's telling us that things do exist conventionally, and then we go to the other extreme and we go, oh, thank God there is something, grasp. So here we over-exaggerate something and cling to something as eternal and permanent. And here we under-exaggerate and chuck the baby out with the bathwater. So we're like two drunken sailors between these two extreme views. So when we're on the right track, and when we hear dependent arising, once we're on the right track by understanding these things, that tells us, that means it is empty of existing from its own side. And every time we hear about emptiness, we go, that tells me it's dependent arising. That's the shift we have to make. And now we're moving in the right direction towards the middle way. And the real middle way, the final middle way, is when these two truths are cognized simultaneously. And that's only when you finally achieve Buddhahood. Because dependent arising and emptiness are like the flip sides of the same coin. They point to each other. They refer to the same thing. This is crucial to understand, just as a theory even. So it keeps us grounded and won't go sailing off into the two extremes and go crazy, you know. Okay. Now, next bit. So because of this ignorance, this maripa, this ego grasping, it causes us to believe 1 billion% without analysis, which we've been believing since beginningless time, that there is in here somewhere, among all the millions of parts, all the bits and pieces of your body, all the bits and pieces of your mind. We've got anger, love, kindness, jealousy, compression, gross mind, subtle mind, millions of parts of my mind, means all the different thoughts, all the different parts of my sensory consciousness. There are bits and pieces, many bits and pieces of the mind, and there are many bits and pieces of the body, ligaments, elbows, eyes, eyelashes, muscles, breasts. Do you understand? Millions of bits. We believe, because of this ego grasping, without question, instinctively, primordially, and totally, that there definitely is somewhere in here, as my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with all the other bits, there is a very special bit called I. Our language expresses this. I have an ear. You know, our word. So language, words a valid cognition, a valid word, I say there is a thermos. That's a sentence. For that to be a valid sentence, a valid series of words which come from thoughts, for them to be valid thoughts, we have to point to something that fits that. So I say, here is a thermos. Now that's a valid statement because there it is. Look, those words point to something that exists and you can point. Pretty straightforward. So I say to you, so there's one argument we have to use, one, it sounds hilarious in the beginning, to try and prove this type of discussion we're having. There's one argument that says if something does exist, it's either one thing or it's more than one. So let's look at this. I will now make a statement. I have a thermos and a mala. So now if that's a true statement, like I said, the first one, you've got to point to how many things there. There are three, think of it, there are three now objects that exist: phenomena, object, existent, object of knowledge, established base, the 5 synonyms for an existent. They're like nouns. Things are nouns, okay? Well, I just mentioned 3 nouns. One is a pronoun, it's true. Thermos, I, mala. That's called 3. I have a thermos and a mala. That's 3 phenomena, 3 nouns. Then if you look with your eyes and you see these shapes and colors and you know the English language and you know the meaning of these words, you will quickly verify my statement because you can see with your own eyes, I just spoke the truth. And that means there are 3 phenomena here. Now, these 3 phenomena, in order for there to be 3, listen to this, in order for there to be 3, they have to be separate, don't they? And independent. This is a straightforward example of 3 phenomena, 3 things that are both separate from each other. In the sense that if I drop the thermos and it broke, Rubina and the mala stay intact, no problem. And that means they also don't depend on each other. So they're separate and independent. It's pretty straightforward. So meaning if the mala breaks, the thermos, oh, poor mala, I'm so sorry, but I'm fine. It's not touched because they don't exist. They don't depend upon each other for their existence. This is a really crucial point. So I'll make another statement. I have a nose and an ear, okay? So without analysis, you look over where you hear this sound coming from and you will verify without analysis that it's true. Rubina indeed does have a nose and an ear. There's no problem with that. But we have to analyze it because what Buddha's saying is we're saying those 3 simple, we're saying that statement, but there's a lie in there. There's a lie in there. We're embellishing. There's a lie in there. Which we don't realize. So let's look at how many phenomena I mentioned. Well, there are 3 phenomena, aren't there? I, 1 noun, pronoun, 2, nose, 3, ear. Listen to this. If that's a true statement, if it's a fact, we have to point out 3 separate things. So we can point out an ear. That's easy. Look, there's an ear. And if it's broken, if it cuts off, if it stops working, the nose is still fine. The nose is looking on, going, oh, phew, I'm glad it's not me. I'm still able to blow snot and breathe. Nose can function fine without an ear. You know, nose is no good, ear works fine. They're separate and independent. They're separate and independent. Think about it. Now, what about the third phenomenon? The phenomenon called I. Now, we believe, this is the point, we believe in the same way ear points to a separate independent thing, nose points to a separate independent thing. We believe without analysis that there is an I, that the word I refers to separate and independent in here somewhere. And that's what Buddha says. Well, I'm sorry, mates, I've found there isn't one, so you better start searching for it. Don't just believe me. This sounds hilarious to us. Search for the I? What are you talking about? It's like a trick. He says, honey, if there is one that is separate and independent, like an ear and a nose, you'll find it. Then in which case I'm wrong and I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. But you won't find one that's separate and independent. Now, this gets where it gets more nuanced. No, we won't go there. That's a conclusion. We'll get to the conclusion. It's more subtle. Okay. Now, if there is a piece in there that is separate and independent, think of this, then you'll be able to point it out. And it won't depend upon the ear, the nose, the eye, the eyelashes, the ligaments, the pee-pee, the caca, and the millions of other bits and pieces. Just like the ear doesn't depend upon a nose, and an eye doesn't depend upon an ear, and a toe doesn't depend upon a finger. There's separate bits that make up the whole. And each has got their own job. There's another whole discussion. We're going to get to this. If there were an intrinsic, or in this case, a separate independent piece called me, which we feel and believe, our words said, I have an ear. It's two things. If there were a separate piece called I in here somewhere, the Christians call it a soul, the Greeks call it an essence, we call it vaguely in the West called ego or something. The Hindus call it a self. If there were that separate independent piece, then when your ear hurts, you'll say, I'm in such pain. You'll say that, won't you? I have pain, you'll say. So, or if, someone says, oh, I can't stand your nose, Robina, it's so ugly. I'll say, how dare you insult me? You will say, no, Robina, you didn't hear me properly. I'm not insulting the eye. I'm not insulting you. I'm insulting your nose. But we assume, first of all, we make two mistakes. And the one we're trying to argue with here is the mistake that there's a separate I. The other mistake we make is that we think that all of me is the I. So we'll argue with both of these. So the first one we're trying to argue with is a separate one. So it's very simple. If there were a piece called me that doesn't depend upon the ear, that's separate from the ear, then when the ear hurts, the eye, like the nose, is going, phew, I'm glad it's not me. Poor ear, I'm so sorry. And you wouldn't say the word, I am in pain. You wouldn't. You'd say the ear is hurting. So what this is concluding is that this is the point. Don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater, because the fact is you won't find an independent I, but that doesn't mean there's no I. This is where it gets more nuanced. As His Holiness says, the I isn't empty of existing from its own side. The I isn't empty of existing intrinsically. The I isn't empty of existing independently of the other bits and pieces, because you can't find it. You won't find it. But that's not the real premise. The I is empty of existing from its own side. The I is empty of existing independently of the other bits and pieces, because it's a dependent arising. So that's what we've got to get eventually. So it is saying you won't find an independent I there, but that doesn't mean there's no I. That's where it gets more nuanced. There's a dependent arising I. So the difficulty is to get the meaning of these two, because they sound contradictory, That's where it's more. That's why thinking you haven't found an I, there's no I, chuck the baby out the bathwater, what the hell, might as well kill myself. That's nihilism. So let's use, I love the example, we'll start with this and we'll go into it later. I love the example of IKEA. You look up on the computer and you find a really delicious looking table. And when you go to IKEA, they give you a box of bits, don't they? They give you a box of pieces. Now, this is a really wonderful analogy. So pretend you're going to buy a Robina, or put your own name there. So you go to IKEA and you order a Cassia, you order a Caroline, you order a Catherine, you order an Anna. So you bring the box home, and this is a really good point. This is the analysis we have to do, the precision and clarity of the analysis of dependent arising. In our search for this I that we believe is there, we have to recognize all the other bits and pieces to see what they're doing and what they are. So one example is, we can see that in that box of IKEA, of a Robina, you're going to find literally thousands of very precise pieces, aren't you? They've done their analysis. they've built a Robina, then they've unpacked the pieces and they put the thousands of pieces in the box. Then you've got to construct the Robina. Now, you know there'll be the exact number of fingers. There won't, you know, even with your table, you don't just get random 5 legs and 2 tops and 14 screws and cross your fingers. Each one has been tested. They've made the table and they've unpacked it. So the same with Robina. There's going to be thousands of pieces in that box, and you're going to slowly construct all the bits of the body, and you're going to slowly construct all the bits of the mind, and each of them, each piece, every single piece in there, like those screws, will be specific and will have a particular job. You have one thumb on the right hand, you have one index finger, one middle finger, one ring finger, and one little finger. And they each have their job. So when they're holding my thermos, the pinky is not arguing with the index finger. Get away, you're doing my job. They've all got their own job, and they all work beautifully hand in hand, doing the job of holding a thermos. So all the pieces work together beautifully. All the pieces have a job. You put them all together perfectly. The eyes fit, the ears, all the pieces fit. Now, as you're getting all this construction ready, you're anxiously looking for for this very special piece, without which there won't be a Robina. And that very special piece is called eye. You're looking for that one because you believe you've got to have that one. Once you put the eye in place, the whole of Robina now turns on and works, you know. No, you won't find one, Buddha says. You won't find one. You don't need one. The pits do beautifully functioning as Robina. Because why? Because Robina is the name. That's it. You give to those bits. That's all. So the fact is, if you're doing this analysis, if you really believe there is an eye in there, what bloody job has it got to do? What's its job, please? And I'll tell you the job we all think. We think it's the boss. We think it's the one that decides. I hold the thermos. I do this. I go to bed. I think this. I am that. I hate this. I love this. That's how we talk. So we've given this status to something that doesn't exist. We've over-exaggerated. We put bells and whistles. We've literally made up a piece that doesn't exist. And that's the nightmare, Buddha says. And everything, attachment is the delusion that is on the basis of the fantasy of the belief in an I that desperately works to get what the fantasy I wants. The anger is the panic attack when it doesn't, and all the other 83,997 delusions that we've constructed, all on the basis of a lie. So we've got to use a lot of clarity, a lot of analysis, a lot of logic at subtle level to unpack and deconstruct this lie and see the truth, to get insight into the fact. There never has been, isn't, and never could be that fantasy nonsense I. And when you've got that, that's your first moment of non-conceptual direct insight into the reality that there never has been, can't, and never could be, isn't that kind of I. Then that leads to the subtle dependent arising, merely labeled. So when we have a break now, you can think about it and come back in an hour and 5 minutes, okay? Jangchob semcho grimpoche ma kie panam ke gyochig kie panyam pa me payang gong ne gong du fa ba sho. Thank you, precious ones. See you in an hour and 5 minutes.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.